You can ignore a philosopher. You can disagree with a politician. You can move on from a religious teacher. But Jesus of Nazareth is different. Because the moment you seriously engage with who he claimed to be, neutrality starts to collapse. See, our modern culture likes to place Jesus into a very comfortable category: a wise moral teacher, a good man, an inspiring spiritual figure. But the historical Jesus doesn't really allow that option, because Jesus didn't just teach morality, he made claims about reality itself. These claims were so radical that people either worshipped him, hated him, or tried to redefine him into something safer. And 2000 years later, we're still wrestling with him, an itinerant preacher from a backwater country village in the nation of Israel. So the question isn't, was Jesus inspiring? The question becomes, who was this man really? Let's start historically. The earliest sources we have about Jesus, the four Gospels, aren't written like mythology. They're filled with geographical detail, named rulers, political figures, cities, villages, specific people, and public events. This isn't once upon a time in a distant land. This is during the rule of Pontius Pilate, under Herod, in Capernaum, near Jerusalem. And what's fascinating is how early these traditions appear. Christianity didn't slowly evolve over centuries into believing Jesus was divine, God, and commanded our allegiance. The movement exploded immediately. Within years of Jesus' death, his followers were already proclaiming that he had risen from the dead and as Messiah was Lord over all creation. That matters because legends usually require distance, time, mythological development, but the resurrection belief appears right at the beginning. And that creates a striking problem because first century Jews were not expecting one man to rise from the dead in the middle of history. Resurrection in Jewish thought was supposed to happen at the end of time for everyone. Yet, suddenly, this group of ordinary people starts proclaiming something shocking: that Jesus had already risen. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but physically. And they proclaimed it publicly in the very region where he had been executed. So we have to ask, what caused that? And then there's Jesus himself. People often talk about Jesus as if he were merely a moral teacher. But when you actually read the Gospels, that category starts to fall apart. Because Jesus constantly places himself at the center. He forgives sins. He claims authority over divine law. He speaks about judging humanity and giving life and resurrection. He says things like, I am the way, the truth, and the life. This is not normal prophetic language. Imagine someone today walking into your city saying, I am the truth. You wouldn't call him a nice ethical teacher no matter what he teaches. You'd think either this person is deceived, dangerous, or something else entirely. And this is where the famous trilemma from C.S. Lewis comes in. Either Jesus was lying, he was delusional, or he was telling the truth. Now people critique the wording of that argument sometimes, and fair enough, but the core point remains powerful. It is extremely difficult to admire Jesus as merely a good moral teacher, while rejecting the very identity claims that define his mission and message. Because his teachings are inseparable from who he claimed to be. Now, of course, people propose alternatives. Some say the resurrection story became legendary over time. But again, the timeline is incredibly early. Others say the disciples fabricated it. But then you have to explain why people would willingly suffer persecution, imprisonment, and death for something they knew was false. Do not willingly die for what they know they invented. Others say it was psychological, visions, grief hallucinations, or emotional experiences. But that explanation struggles to account for the rapid and unified rise of the resurrection belief across multiple communities. And each alternative explanation seems to solve one problem while creating several more. But here's the central issue. Everything in Christianity revolves around one event, the resurrection. Because if Jesus truly rose from the dead, then suddenly his claims make sense. His authority makes sense. The rise of Christianity makes sense. The disciples' transformation makes sense. And the entire Christian movement throughout the centuries becomes coherent. But if the resurrection did not happen, then we still need an explanation for the historical aftermath it left behind. And that's why the question of Jesus refuses to disappear. Because Jesus isn't merely a historical figure, he's a confrontation. He forces interpretation. You can reject him, you can redefine him, you can argue against Christianity entirely. But what becomes difficult is remaining indifferent. Because the figure presented in the earlier sources does not ask merely for admiration, he asks for allegiance. And that changes everything. So, no, the real question isn't, was Jesus influential? The real question is, did this man actually tell the truth about himself? Because if he did, then the reality itself is far bigger, stranger, and more beautiful than we could have ever imagined. And if he truly rose from the dead, then his claim still stands today, not as a relic of history, but as a living challenge to every person who encounters him. And once you seriously wrestle with that question, it doesn't disappear easily. God bless.